Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
We're learning Mishnayos Erevin, Parak Ches, chapter 8, Mishnah Zayin, Mishnah 7. Okay. Amas Hamayim, Shiveres B'Chatzer. A water canal that is passing through a courtyard. Okay, so this is the setup. It was common to dig canals next to a river to bring water to places farther away from the river. In this case, the canal flowed from the river into a courtyard under its wall and then flowed out back to the river. Okay, so you got a canal going under this courtyard, and it goes under the wall that divides under the wall of the courtyard. Okay, so you basically have this canal open to a river in the front and a river in the back. That's the case here, okay? Because it's flowing out back to the river. Whatever way it's set up, right? But it's going through, it's open on both ends. That's important to know. Now, the Mishnah speaks of a canal that is at least 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide. Those are the dimensions of this canal. These dimensions make an independent reshus, an independent domain, and not part of the courtyard. Since the canal is completely open at its ends to the river, which is considered a carmelis, the canal itself is treated as a carmelis as well. That means like this. It's also very important for the Mishnah. This river, or canal rather, that's flowing under the courtyard. So it's under the courtyard. Only because it has the dimensions that makes it its own domain. It's like a reshus hayachid. It's 10 tefachim deep, 4 tefachim wide. Because it's its own domain, that is why we do not consider it part of the courtyard.
This is subterranean?
Yes. Yeah. It's not part of them only because of that, only because of the fact that it has those dimensions, which forms its own reshus, its own domain, is it not part of the chutzner of the courtyard. And therefore, because it's open to a carmelis is an area that midrabanan, according to rabbinic law, we treat it like a public domain. We don't treat it like a private domain or a public domain. Midrabanan, according to rabbinic law, you cannot go from a carmelis to a public domain or to a private domain or vice versa. So a river is a carmelis, meaning midrabanan you can't carry there. If the canal is open, has its own dimensions, it's considered its own domain, and open to the river, it's open to a carmelis, it's also a carmelis. Were the canal to be less than 10 amas deep and 4 tefachim wide, which means it doesn't create its own, it's not considered its own domain, it would automatically be considered part of the courtyard, and it wouldn't matter that it's open to the rivers. In the same way you can carry the courtyard, you can draw water out of the canal. Okay, it's important to keep that in mind.
And this is visible?
Yeah.
This is visible from the courtyard.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to want to draw water from it. So now, let's start again. A canal of water passing through a courtyard. You cannot fill water from it. You can't draw water from it on Shabbos. Unless you made a wall 10 tvachim high at where the canal enters the courtyard and where it leaves. Now again, this is similar to yesterday's situation, just not two different chatzeres, but rather you have to because it's going under because it's connected to the rivers. At this point, we see it as a carmelis. You can't draw water out of it into your private domain. You can't do that. So now, although there is a wall going over, although there is a wall, there's the chutzner has a wall. It's got a wall around it, right? And you basically have an area where the canal is going under the wall. We don't say the wall of the chutzner of the courtyard acts also as a wall for the canal to say, okay, because of these walls that are above it, we look at it like the walls extend down. And if we do that, then we see the water of the canal not connected to the river, but just part of the chutzner. But we don't do that, just with the walls of the courtyard, according to this opinion of the Mishnah. Just like in yesterday's Mishnah, you have to make a special wall for this. A wall that was just there to be the wall of the courtyard cannot suffice as the wall to basically, say to bounder off the canal and say it belongs to the courtyard. You got to go ahead and make its own wall. You got to make a wall 10 tvachim high that's going to be inside of the canal that that will now be able to say, okay, this is where the canal, this part of the canal belongs to the chutzner, and you're going to have to do it at the opening where the canal enter you have to do it where the water enters the canal, where it goes out of the canal. Both ends are open to the river, so you've got to put a wall at both ends of the chutzner to be able to say that we see this water is not connected to the river, but just as part of the chutzner. So you got to make a wall 10 tvachim high. Every wall has to be 10 tvachim high. That's the minimum height of every wall. You got to do it, but kanisa b'yitzia. You got to do it at the entrance. You got to do it where the water enters the chutzner and where the water goes out. And just like yesterday, we had a discussion. We had different opinions about, okay, how much of this wall should be in the water? How much of the wall should be above the water? Maybe it doesn't have to touch the water at all, as long as it's within the rim of the canal. The same argument yesterday would apply here. Here, I think it's brought down that the partition must be placed within the banks of the canal and extend across its width, so that people will see the partition as a separation between the water inside the courtyard and the water outside of it. Okay? Now, okay. So that's that. So basically, according to this part of the Mishnah, the walls of the courtyard cannot act as walls that separate the canal water from the canal water under the chutzner to outside the chutzner. You got to make your own wall. Rabbi Yehuda says, the wall that's on top of it can be seen as its wall. Just like yesterday, Rabbi Yehuda said, a suspended wall is enough to be able to be a separation of the water between the two courtyards. Here again, a suspended wall can be enough to be considered the wall, the boundary for the canal water. You don't need to make a separate wall for it. You don't need to make a special wall in the canal. The wall of the courtyard that passes above the canal, just as it's a wall for the courtyard, it acts as a wall for the waters below it. And you can just go in and draw the water without doing anything more. That's Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda said, wanted to show that he was correct. Ma'isa ba'ama shel Ovel. The story took place with a canal of a place called Ovel. That's what the place was called. And the elders allowed people to draw water from it on Shabbos. And there was no special wall there. Like, that was a fact. All you had were the walls of that chutzner. There were no other walls there in the canal, and the elders still allowed the people to draw the water from there. That would be a proof to me that they held that the walls of the chutzner itself can act as the walls for the waters of the canal. Amrulai, the other sages said to Rabbi Yehuda, you got the story wrong a little bit. You know why they allowed them to draw from it? Not because of the walls, but because the canal didn't have the dimensions of it being its own domain. It either wasn't 10 tvachim deep, wasn't 4 tvachim wide, and when it doesn't have those dimensions to make its own domain, then automatically, even without special walls, it's part of the chutzner. Once it's not its own domain, then automatically we see it as part of the chutzner, and therefore, just as the walls of the chutzner are walls for the chutzner, they're walls for the canal, because we don't see the canal as something that's on its own and therefore connected to the waters. We automatically then see it as part of the chutzner. If it's part of the chutzner, then you can draw water from it without having to do anything extra. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So was that the bottom line?